A sad day for Ukraine. They finally had to admit that the country was out of the door to joining NATO, as they had been longing for since 2008. At a recent press conference, when a reporter asked if he was ready to accept Ukraine's neutral status, President Zelensky answered verbatim as follows: "Unfortunately, we are not allowed to join NATO. Ukraine is not invited to NATO, and there is nothing to discuss here. The US, as a major NATO ally, does not support Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. That is the situation at the moment. But not being able to join NATO is not the only thing that makes Ukraine so tragic. 3 years of conflict have taken a huge toll on the country. How has the war destroyed Ukraine's present and future? In February 2025, close to the 3-year mark of the war, President Zelensky himself claimed that more than 46,000 Ukrainian soldiers were underground, a figure that was certainly much more optimistic than the reality. In September 2024, the Street World magazine estimated that Ukraine had lost 80,000 soldiers and another 400,000 wounded. If Western estimates were even partially correct, they would suggest that 5% of Ukraine's fighting-age males were, how do you say, unfit to fight. And the reality is probably even worse. As we've seen the war intensify in recent months, with both Russia and Ukraine trying to gain the upper hand on the battlefield in order to gain leverage at the negotiating table. Of course, Russia has also suffered significant human losses. The Kremlin has stopped publishing its casualty figures since 2022. However, in February 2025, BBC Russia and Mediasona confirmed the identities of a total of 95,000 Russian soldiers killed and more than 300,000 wounded. Russia's true losses could be higher, as media estimates include only 45% to 65% of the actual number of defectors. Journalists estimate that the true toll could range from 138,500 to 200,000 dead. The problem is that Russia's population of more than 144 million is several times larger than Ukraine's 38 million. So in absolute terms, Russia may have suffered more. But in relative terms of population, Ukraine is in much more trouble. More importantly, Russia has made up for much of its losses by gaining control over new populations, territories, and resources in Ukraine. Over the past 3 years, Ukraine has lost an estimated 11% of its territory, in addition to the 7% previously occupied by Russia and pro-Russian separatists since 2014. That means about 18% of Ukraine is now under Russian military control. About 5 million people are nominally Ukrainian citizens but may be reunified by Russia. President Putin has ordered all 5 million people to renounce their Ukrainian citizenship and accept Russian citizenship instead or face deportation. That means Russia has likely gained about 5 million citizens to compensate for the 138,500 to 200,000 soldiers lost, and the somewhere around 650,000 Russians who have emigrated since the war began. Meanwhile, Ukraine has not only lost about 80,000 soldiers and 5% of its fighting-age male population disabled, but also lost another 5 million people behind it, 6 million of whom have left Ukraine to seek asylum in other countries during the war. These figures have led the Wall Street Journal to estimate that the population of Ukraine still under its control is actually between 26 and 27 million. The country had a population of around 41 million before the war, which pales in comparison to the 51 million it had when it declared independence in 1991. In addition to the loss of population and territory, Ukraine has also suffered a severe blow to its infrastructure. A UN report estimates that the cost of rebuilding and restoring the Ukrainian economy after the fire is over will be around $524 billion, nearly 3 times the entire economic output of Ukraine in 2024. In other words, Ukraine will never be able to rebuild itself and will have to rely on foreign lifelines. That is why Kiev is still determined to seek security guarantees from the West. But when U.S. support for Ukraine is shaky as it is now, we need to ask how this war has devastated Ukraine's future. After a fierce war of words in the White House, Mr. Trump cut off intelligence to Ukraine, leaving its military to fight in the dark. What consequences has it had? Look at the actual developments on the battlefield. By then, the US had given Ukraine $67 billion in military aid, while Europe had pumped in a cool $65 billion. If the Trump administration had permanently ended military aid, Ukraine would have lost half of its oxygen. Of course, Europe could have made up for it, and Ukraine would have been able to produce many of its own toys. However, there is one thing they cannot replace the US with: advanced air defense systems, especially the Patriot. It is capable of taking down long-range Russian missiles, extremely advanced, complex, and expensive. To produce such a system requires 2 years and $1 billion. Moreover, only the United States can produce the type of interceptor that this system fires. The United States has delivered to Ukraine 7 Patriot systems, at least 2 of which are believed to have been destroyed. The remaining 5 systems are indispensable for protecting Ukraine's largest cities such as Kiev and Kharkiv, home to millions of people. But if even these systems run out of ammunition, Ukraine's major cities and infrastructure will be exposed to Russian firepower in a way they have never experienced before. This could lead to more Ukrainians leaving the country, exacerbating its demographic and economic problems. Of course, Europe has promised to continue pumping oxygen into Ukraine until the end. The EU has proposed an ambitious plan to raise €800 billion to improve Europe's defense capabilities and continue to support Ukraine. But as things stand, the proposal remains just that, a proposal. This is not the first time that Europe has planned rearmament, but has failed to live up to expectations. And this plan is likely to be the same, although European countries are still torn between prioritizing social security and increasing military spending. Deep down, they talk big about this plan and that plan. But Europe is still deeply divided on the Ukraine issue. After 3 years of conflict and a bold declaration to cut off Russian gas, the EU still buys more energy resources from Russia than it sends Ukraine in aid. In the 3rd year of the war, from February 2024 to February 2025, the EU still imported €21.9 billion of Russian oil and gas, while providing Ukraine with only €18.7 billion in financial aid. Not only that, in many European countries with large armies, such as Poland and Germany, the public seems to be very opposed to sending soldiers to Ukraine as a peacekeeping force. And these are 2 of the top 5 military spenders in Europe. In short, only the UK and France have publicly declared their willingness to contribute to the Ukrainian peacekeeping force after the war ends. But even so, all of this remains empty promises, because Russia has firmly rejected the idea of deploying NATO troops on Ukrainian territory. Of course, if you think about it, that's why Russia invaded Ukraine in the first place. But Ukraine's biggest problem, and its biggest obstacle to surviving as a country after the war, you know what? It's its own terrible demographics. Even before the war, Ukraine's demographics were among the most problematic in the world. After declaring independence in 1991, the chaotic transition caused Ukraine's birth rate to collapse completely. In 2001, the birth rate plummeted to its lowest level in the world at the time, just 1.1, far below the replacement rate of 2.1. Since then, Ukraine's birth rate has recovered slightly, but has never exceeded 1.5. In other words, since 1991, Ukraine has not produced enough people to compensate for the number of people who have died or left the country. That has caused Ukraine's population to decline year after year. When a war breaks out, Ukraine's demographics become even more nightmarish. The birth rate has dropped below 1. This means that Ukraine has both the lowest birth rate in the world and the highest death rate in the world. There are 3 times more people dying than being born. This is what the population of Ukraine looks like right now. This squeeze is made up of young people in their late teens to early 30s, those born in the 1990s and early 2000s. This is why Kiev has consistently resisted calls to lower the draft age to include this demographic. You may have heard the horror stories of conscription, but Ukraine has never drafted from the age group that typically provides the country with the most soldiers. Simply because 18-24-year-olds are the youngest age group in Ukraine today. If they were all war veterans, Ukraine would have wiped out an entire generation, forever losing the ability to rebuild and recover. To make matters worse, the vast majority of the 6 million Ukrainians who have fled the country since the war began are women of childbearing age and children, and most of them have no intention of returning home. Without finding a way to attract them back, Ukraine's reconstruction will be hopeless due to a lack of experienced human resources. And to attract refugees back, Ukraine needs to maintain long-term stability, ensuring that another war will not happen in the future. All the more reason for Kiev to frantically seek security guarantees from outside powers. But so far, as we have said, it seems that no one has really given Ukraine solid security guarantees. And now it is time to talk about what I think many of you have been thinking about from the beginning. Ukraine's resources. This treasure trove was supposed to contribute to the country's reconstruction. But there are too many problems here. Ukraine claims to have nearly $15 trillion underground. These are internationally recognized mineral resources, including what they claim are the largest deposits of lithium, titanium, and uranium in Europe. Ukraine claims to have about 5% of the world's mineral resources, including large deposits containing 23 of the 50 minerals considered important by the U.S. government. This advertisement caught the attention of President Donald Trump. So his administration wanted Ukraine to sign an agreement for the two countries to establish a joint investment fund. The Ukrainian side will contribute 50% of the total future revenue from mineral resources owned by the government. However, this agreement does not contain any solid security guarantee. The interests in the mineral deposits in Ukraine are already a kind of guarantee, because Russia would not dare attack such targets. However, who can be sure that Ukraine is really as rich in minerals as claimed? Secondly, a huge amount of the advertised resources are located in Russian-occupied territory. It is estimated that this area contains 53% of Ukraine's potential mineral resources. And this is not a coincidence. Russia has a plan. One is to paralyze Ukraine's future and force Kyiv to accept the conditions of Moscow. Second, it can be used as leverage in negotiations with the United States. President Putin announced that Russia is ready to cooperate with the United States on minerals and that Washington can invest in the areas of Moscow that it has announced it will annex in Ukraine. President Trump also left open the option of signing an important mineral agreement with Moscow. As I write this, you have just announced that negotiations are underway on the terms of the division of land between Russia and Ukraine. Does that mean that the two giants have divided up the Ukrainian pie? Moreover, all these minerals are virtually untapped. To turn them into hard cash would require a major project that would take years to complete and a huge amount of capital. World experience shows that it takes an average of 18 years to develop a mine to its full potential, and it usually costs between $500 million and $1 billion. After all that time and money, the mine can only be put into operation. And what contractor would have such confidence in Ukraine in 50 years? There's also the issue of human resources, which, as we have said, Ukraine lacks. And then there is energy. Mining is an extremely energy-intensive activity. But Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been hit hard. At least 80% of it has been destroyed. That's why the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, which is under Russian control, has become a subject of intense discussion between Washington and Kiev. It is also the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. President Trump has suggested that U.S. ownership of Ukrainian power plants could help ensure the security of these facilities. But in reality, this is part of a U.S. strategy to separate Western Europe, especially Germany, from Russia. The U.S. wants to gain economic and infrastructural control in Europe, mainly in the energy sector. The ultimate goal is for Europe to remain closely aligned with the U.S. and not with Russia. However, if any energy interaction between Europe and Russia is to be established, the U.S. will be the necessary link between them. It is sad that the future of Ukraine is not decided by the Ukrainians themselves, but will be determined by the Russian-American political game. It is a pity that Ukraine is still a buffer zone. If they were wise enough to remain a neutral country as a bridge between Russia and Europe, they could have exploited the economic advantages of both regions to enrich themselves. But looking at the present, perhaps they will once again become a buffer zone, but they are forced to do so. This conflict can be seen as Russia preventing Ukraine from becoming a buffer zone between NATO and Russia under NATO's control. As a result, Ukraine has become a poor country in Europe. A disputed buffer zone between East and West with problems that are not known when they can be resolved. What do you think? Let Global Insights know in the comments. Now, goodbye, and see you again.